We are starting the sermon series today on Daniel, the book of Daniel, and interestingly enough, I did not know this, but apparently this is the only place in the Old Testament, if not one of very few, where the book is written in Aramaic. We do see later on in the New Testament Jesus speaking Aramaic, but I believe this may be the only place we hear it in the Old Testament because Aramaic was the official language of Babylon. And this is where the Israelites find themselves in captivity. So we have a King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So when you think of Babylon, go right ahead and you can Google it, and it's apparently one of the ancient mysteries of the world, or ancient beauties of the world with their hanging gardens. So the Babylon must have been full of greenery, beautiful, lush, and a very beautiful place. And this is where the southern kingdom, Judah, had been taken into slavery. And that was about the year 587 before Christ. Some 500, 600 years before Christ, the Israelites were finally taken into Babylon. Now we have this king named Nebuchadnezzar, and for some reason he thought it would be a great idea for all his scouts to go out and find all the beautiful young men in captivity in Babylon and bring them to the court to serve him and learn the language, become special mediators and speakers and diviners. So as I'm reading this, I'm wondering, I wonder why this king would want all these pretty young men to come into court and to serve him. We'll never know. But it makes one raise their eyebrows sometimes. They were given very special treatment, very much royal rations of food and wine, and they were to be educated for 3 years. Now, amongst this large group of beautiful young men, we find 4 who are of interest: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We may better know them by the names their Babylonian captives gave them. Belshazzar, well, we probably know Daniel better, but they were given names in captivity: Belshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So those aren't their real names, however, they're known for that. Sometimes when you go into captivity, the opposing force doesn't like your name and they rename you. This happened in America with the slaves coming off the ship. They didn't like their names or couldn't pronounce them, so they assigned them new names like John Johnson. Very easy name. So these were names that they were given. However, Daniel didn't want to eat the food or drink the drinks that they gave him because he did not want to defile himself in God's presence. All right? So they said, "You're not eating. Why are you doing this? And what makes you so special that you're not eating our food and drinking our drinks?" And he said, "Give me 10 days. I will show you that my diet is better." So for 10 days, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego ate nothing but vegetables. And at the end of 10 days, their overseer saw they were more fit, more active and healthier than all the other people that were getting the king's rations of food and wine. So this may be a beginning of what we would consider kosher eating practices. It hasn't really become a thing yet, but this is one of the stories where perhaps a Jewish community would say, we are following Daniel's example. So one night, and we're getting to the scripture, believe it or not, this is an introduction to the study. One night the king had a dream, and he needed it. It was so weird. It was so weird that he needed it translated to him, much like Joseph did with the Pharaoh. So the king first went to his main diviners, and he said, I had a dream. Can you tell me what it means? And they said, oh, king, tell us what the dream is, and then we'll tell you what it meant. And the king goes, oh, no. I want you to tell me what I dreamed, and then tell me what it is it meant. So the king was testing these guys, okay? They couldn't do it. They said, King, no man on earth can interpret your dream unless you tell us what it was. Only gods can decide what dreams mean if they are not told. And the King Nebuchadnezzar got so mad that he ordered all the wise men in the country to be murdered. Not only murdered, but torn limb from limb. Very gruesome death. And meanwhile, Daniel went, oh, I bet I could do better than that. So we went through the stages, like his guard, the guard's boss, the boss's boss, and then the second in command of Nebuchadnezzar, and convinced him, I need to see the king, Nebuchadnezzar, because I know what his dream meant. And he got all the way to Nebuchadnezzar, and he said this. Daniel 2:24-29. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, who the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, do not destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will give the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who can tell the king the interpretation. The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or diviners can show to the king the mystery that the king is asking. So he's going along the same lines so far. And then verse 28 starts with, but. The most powerful word in the Bible, but. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and that God has disclosed to King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen at the end of days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed were these. And I'm going to tell you the dream. For some reason, our lectionary ends there. And I thought, oh, these guys are not going to like that. They're going to want to know what the dream was, right? So he says, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image stood before you, and its form was awesome. I bet there's a different word that's translated there, but we're going to go with awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Okay, what does it mean? I figured all of you were diviners, right? So no, we don't know. And even I looked at that before I looked at the interpretation, and I'm going, I don't know. I probably learned it in seminary, but I forget. Now, while you watched, while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together, and they became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Did you got your thinking caps on? So first, what Daniel did was cater to Nebuchadnezzar's ego. So he's explaining this dream, and he says, you, O great king, are the head of gold. But no empire lasts. So after you, another great empire will rise. And then after that, a stronger one, the strongest one of all, because the stomach and the thighs were the biggest section. That's gonna just wipe everything else out and become the greatest. But ready, king, ready for this. The feet were smashed, and the stone that smashed them became so great, it filled the whole world. He's talking about kingdoms that are to come after Nebuchadnezzar. So that was the interpretation. He was letting the king know, you are great, you're the best right now, you're the best king that ever kinged. So Daniel knows where he gets his butter from, or his bread. And after that, Nebuchadnezzar is smart as well. He knows he's not going to live forever, so other kingdoms are going to come after him. So what he was talking about was Babylon, and then the Chaldean came over very shortly, and then the Greeks. The Greeks were the Bronze Age, and they filled the earth, and they took over everything. And this is where interpretation goes all over the place, because who is the last kingdom? Conservative scholars think that it's Rome, because the mountain filled the whole earth. It was greater than Greece. However, I'm a liberal scholar, and Daniel had no idea of anything remotely near to Rome. It came way too late. So this was written during the time of the Greeks. So yes, the Greeks were big and they filled everything, but then something came without hands and broke everything with a big rock that became a mountain. And who was Daniel really submitting to in that interpretation? The rock without hands was God. And God's kingdom is so great that it fills the earth, and then all other kingdoms that try to rise and fall, they're all turned to dust. So this is the kingdom of God. It doesn't have boundaries. It's within us. And therefore it makes it the biggest one ever, right? I have heard some people, excuse me, say that this is a little tiny apocalypse, and so they will read it literally and say that when the apocalypse comes, the whole earth is going to be full of either the Satan and God fighting, or whatever. We'll all be raptured up into heaven, and then there will be lots of problems down on earth while the rest of us suffer. Or, well, I'll be in heaven. But the rest of the people who don't know Jesus are going to be down here wandering aimlessly. That is not what I think this means. Daniel was absolutely giving us a metaphor for the power of God's kingdom. And it's, like I said, it's not a physical place. So the power of God's kingdom or realm is inside of us. And each time that we reach out our hand to help somebody, each time that we put money in the food shelf or give a donation, that's God's kingdom working. And it gets bigger and bigger with every self-sacrifice that we make. And that is the glory of God. And Daniel knew this and knew that we can't hold it back. It works on its own. It's so powerful and so easy. And after Daniel said this, Nebuchadnezzar, it says in the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar ran before Daniel, prostrated himself, and said, "You are the greatest. I want you to be the head of my spiritual committee." That's a reinterpretation in my own words, obviously. But the king was so grateful. He didn't kill anybody, and he raised Daniel up as a leader. And naturally, Daniel brought his 3 buddies with him as well. Now, in the following weeks, we're going to find out what happened to them after Nebuchadnezzar died. It didn't go as well as we would hope. So that's your little clincher. Stay tuned for next week, and we'll hear more